1.
Hey, Don.
Hey,
Ah.
Amanda.
Sorry, we were having some technical difficulties. We were frozen on 10 in our countdown.
Yeah, but you know what? We just skipped the other 9 parts and go live again.
It went live all at the same time. What's going on, Don? What's happening?
Yeah, well, last in our last stream, I showed how to implement a theme switcher, and it's right on the screen. Yeah, so for all of you who missed it, yeah, this is what we built, and the cool thing is that it will sync up with the operating system as well. I put up a blog post on the DevExpress site as well with a recap on what I did. And yeah, this time we're going to take it a bit further, obviously, because this is a nice start. But yeah, today the plan is to show you how to get some data out of a database into your application. So we're going to continue with the same project, and we're going to add some functionality during the stream.
Okay, sounds
So
good.
all right, well, let's get started. Yeah, so in a lot of demos, there is obviously quite a simple approach of getting data into a database. This is what I'm going to show you as well, but then we're going to take it a step further and set up an architecture that you can reuse that has a bit more things like validation and all that kind of stuff. So let's first have a look at our yeah, at a database.
Okay.
I Most of my demos I use the same database which is freely available. Let me get that. I've already configured it, and this database is a small simple database. You see the diagram here as well. So it's got a bunch of artists, it's got some albums, it's got some tracks, and it's got some invoice information and customer information as well. So it's a database that you can download for free from this GitHub repository, and this is what I'm going to use.
So it's like a record store.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, the database is a bit outdated, so not the latest tracks are in there, but it is just to have some data where we can play around with.
Okay.
So yeah, the first thing would be to I'm going to use Entity Framework for data access, and yeah, the first thing would be to scaffold this database. Obviously, I've already configured the database on my local SQL server, so I'm now going to add this to the project. So let's quickly do that by going to the project. For all of you who watched last week, you might have noticed that I have changed the names slightly, and I've given it a proper name, which is also available on the GitHub repository of this project. So the first thing that we would need to do is we need to, well, I would like to add an extra assembly which will hold the entity framework models and some helper code that we will be using during this stream. So for that, I will add a new project. And in this case, I'm going to use a class library. So that's yeah, just a typical assembly, which is already for a long time available with the .NET Framework. In this case, I will call it properly as well. So this is going to be dx chinook.data.ef. So for me, it sounds like we have to deal with Entity Framework here.
Okay.
I'm going to put it in the same folder. I'll leave it on the same .NET version as the rest of the project. And here it is. Let's see. So now we want to scaffold that database. And for that, we need to do a couple of things. The first one is we need to add a number of packages in this in the main project. Otherwise, the scaffolding won't work for some reason. So what I'll do is I can do it through NuGet, but I can also just copy and paste it. So let me just change this. I'm going to add the packages in the solution. And this is going to be changed. And I will switch this to 6.0.0.
What is that version?
That's the version of Entity Framework. I think for .NET 6, there is a newer version. I think it's 6.0.12, but for this demo, that is not really a big issue, and we can upgrade it later on.
Oh.
So the first package that we'll need is the Entity Framework core.sql server. And another one, which is important, is the tools package, which allows us to scaffold. And with this in place, I'll save the project so the packages can be resolved. And I will copy this over to that newly created library as well. Oh, I'll copy it, including the item group, and put it right in here. And now we can remove these ones. Another thing that we need to do is that the Chinook application will reference the EF one. And with this in place, we can now scaffold that database. So what this does is it will check what's inside the database, and it will create the entity framework models according to the database setup.
Okay.
The easiest way of doing that is by using the package manager console. And for that, I will copy a line of code, which I have always available because I just can't remember this. So what this basically does, it's a bit small. Let me zoom it in a bit so you can see it. So I do the scaffold DB context. This is the connection string to my database. I will be using the SQL Server, and I will create these classes in the output there models. And most important, I want to have that in this particular project. So if everything is configured properly, it should check the database now. It will create a bunch of classes, and it will give me this warning.
Ooh, what's the warning?
Yeah, the warning is that there is a potentially sensitive information. And it is absolutely right about that, because if I check the files, or at least one of the files that has been created, what you'll see is that the connection string here is put in code, which is not the best way of doing so. But this is how the scaffolder works. So the easiest way is to remove it, because this is going to be configured at another place. So we can just remove that.
And it doesn't affect it.
Yeah, no, this will not affect it in any way, but it will get rid of the warning. So here we have all those entities that maybe you remember what was on the diagram that I showed. So all of these entities, you see it, customer, invoice,
Yes.
and all the rest. They're all in here.
Oh, they're all right there.
Yeah. And most important, there is also a DB context, which sets up the connection with the database. So with this in place, we can also remove these packages from the main application. One of the other things which is, yeah, which I would consider as being easy is because we need to register certain things in the application here. Yeah, so we need to configure the entity framework DB context. What I always do is when I have a helper assembly like the one that we have here, is that I will rename this class to register services. Yeah, that's fine. And I'm going to create a static register services class, which will have an extension method I service collection register data services. This will have a I service collection services, and here we can configure yeah, certain things that we need with the dependency injection later on.
Okay.
I will return the services here, so we'll get rid of that error that was shown. And now what we can do is we can go to the services, add DB context. That's going to be the Chinook context with a number of options. And those options are the first one is use SQL Server. And that one will need that connection string, what I just removed. But I'll pass it in. Oh, let me make the screen a bit smaller again. That was for the package manager console. And another thing that I will do is one of the parameters is the service lifetime that we're going to configure. And in this case, I will use the transient one. And yeah, in a nutshell, what this means is that whenever we want the DB context to be injected somewhere, yeah, the lifetime is going to be transient. And that is particularly useful when you want to have several calls to the database in like a same method which are being executed asynchronously. Then you want to have that transient service lifetime.
Got it.
So with this in place, we see that the connection string is missing. So I will also add a parameter here, which is going to be the connection string. And now I can go to the program CS file of the main application, and I can do something similar as what we do with the DevExpress initialization. I can now just say builder services register data services. And so it's now calling this method, and I can register everything in that helper method. The only thing we'll need is we will need to pass in the connection string, and that is going to be the builder.configuration.get connection string. And in this case, it's going to be the Chinook connection. So now I got rid of the connection string, which normally would have a username and password whatsoever, and that will be stored in the app settings.json, which is a better place of doing that. And for that, which is another typical thing that I tend not to remember, I'm going to put that right in here. So here's the Chinook connection. This is the information that I removed from the initial warning message.
Right.
And now it's in a better place, basically.
It's in a better place.
Yeah. Well, that sounds a bit.
little dark.
But that was just because you mentioned it. I didn't even think about it. All right. So yeah, with this in place, I can run the application and you will see that actually nothing has changed, but we just configured the application to use a database. So now we obviously want to do something with the data in a database.
Yes.
And for that, yeah, I would like to use a data grid. So um, for that, there are a couple of approaches. And for this, I will switch over to our demo site because there are a couple of interesting code pieces which we can take over. So I'm here at our demo site. We have the grid section and well, a couple of things can be found at the data binding section. And one of the things that I would like to use is this approach. I mean, you can bind whatever data to the grid and the grid will display it properly, but I would like to deal with large amounts of data as well. So in that case, I would check out this example, which is the large data, which is based on an iQueryable, which comes with link. And as you can see, there is a bunch of pages here, more than 100,000. And if you see how fast this scrolls, because if there is like 100,000 pages with 10 records, that's gonna be like a million records. And that is not as fast as what you see here. So this approach will make sure that if we are on page 7, it will skip out of the database, it will skip the first 7 pages or the first 6 pages, and it will only fetch the records that are needed. And this is obviously, yeah, very cool when you deal with large data. There is not so much data involved being sent forward and back. So this is something that I would go for. And well, there is some information here. It's yeah, there is something about a grid DevExtreme data source and a bunch of other things. But it's more interesting to watch at the code and see how this works and how we can get that in our application as well.
Hmm.
So first we have the grid. And you know what? I'm just going to copy this. Let me first create a new page quickly, and I'm going to copy over a couple of pieces of code. I think this is still quite big. Yeah. So in this page folder, I'm going to create a new Razor component. And this component is going to be called customers. We'll do something with the customers. And I will remove this page directive from the original grid one, because that is just some dummy data and I don't want to change anything in the navigation. So when you now click the grid, you will go to the customer section like this.
Hmm.
Next, I was going to copy some data out of this example. In this case, I will copy this grid and put it right here.
So you're just copying that straight from our DevExpress demo center.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm copying over some pieces because, yeah, I can type quite fast, but copy and pasting is better. And as you can see, all the demos, they have the source code provided, so you can actually pick your code and just paste it in and change
Yes,
it.
that's so awesome.
So for this, these columns, they are definitely not correct because this is an entire different data collection, but I'm going to leave one in. Keyboard navigation enabled. Yeah, well, for now, it doesn't really matter that much. So I've copied over this, and now we need some more. Let me see. Interesting things here are the data property and the uninitialized. So I'm going to copy this over and we'll change it in our code. So yeah, I guess the first thing which is quite interesting to mention is that in a lot of code, specifically with Blazor, everything is bound to typed objects. So in a lot of examples, you see this as being a list of certain elements, and then the grid will work with it. But what you see with our DevExpress Blazor grid is that this is like an unknown object, or typically it can contain whatever thing, and it can be a collection with things. But in this case, we're gonna bind a grid DevExtreme data source to it, and at runtime, the grid, when it that data thing is bound to the data collection of the grid, the grid itself will check what is bound to it, and it will behave accordingly, which is quite smart. So it knows that we're going to be using a grid DevExtreme data source. So the grid knows that it can use paging and sorting and filtering on the server, which is quite cool. In this case, let's fix this code up, because we are not doing anything here. This is also not from us. This is not from us. We don't want to do anything with the connection string, because that was already set up. The only thing that we typically need to do uh, to um, to get those customers in is a few things. We need to be using the DX Chinook data EF dot models. And once we have this, we can use dependency injection to get a Chinook context, and we'll be naming that dbctx. So this will give us a DB context to the Chinook database. And now we can do it quite simple. We want to have customers. So in this case, I want to have a list of customers. And how do I get them? Well, I can do that by saying ctx dot customers. Yeah, so this is an iQueryable collection, and that will be passed into the grid DevExtreme data source. And with this in place, we can use the customize load options. In this case, it's not really necessary, but for some scenarios it can impact performance quite a bit. For this, we will need to specify the name of the primary key of the customers. So the best way of doing that is by using this approach.
Okay.
Well, let's, yeah, if you would run this, there will obviously be no columns, because, yeah, well, there's one column that will be empty, because that area does not exist in that customer entity. So we need to add those columns quickly. And one way of doing so is by navigating to the customer class. I want to have these columns. And now I'm interested if anybody has mastered the art of searching and replacing inside Visual Studio by using regular expressions. I mean, it costed me a bit of time to sort that out, but you can do some really cool stuff, because I want to replace this as being DX grid data columns. So the only thing that I will do now is I will select this, hit Control H, make sure this box has been checked.
What are you doing right now?
I want to replace that public string
Mm-hmm.
and that get set. This whole stuff should be replaced, and should become something like DX grid data column. Field name is first name, and the caption maybe as well. But I want to do it in one go. So I can do that with search and replace by using regular expressions, which is a very cool trick in Visual Studio. So I will be looking for public something. It could be a string, or it could be something else. And then I want to have that property name, so I will catch that with a regular expression as well. And now it will find that information. What I can do now is I can go to the replace box and let me copy this. I will paste that in here. The field name is going to be name of customer dot the second thing, second parameter. So we have one capture and the second capture. So we want to place the second capture in here. And the caption of the column will be the field name. That's also number 2. And if I would now replace it on the selection, let me select that stuff again.
Oh,
I have replaced all of it.
nice. So
Yeah.
you're just saving yourself time of like typing that all in.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I'm willing to do work, but not like this kind of work, you know? That's where I have a computer for.
It's where you draw the line.
There are
I don't
limits,
blame you.
exactly. All right, so with this in place, we have now configured the grid to be using those columns. And it should use paged browsing, server-side paging as well. So it doesn't really matter whether there are 100 customers or 100,000 customers. It should be always the same speed. So let's see if I forgot something. I don't think so, but you never know.
Fingers crossed.
Let's head back to our little demo. Make sure it's reloaded properly. So if I now go to the grid, what we'll see is that it will fetch the data out of the database.
Oh.
These are just customers that come with the Chinook database. And yeah, this is typically the same example as you saw on the demo side, but we now customized it towards our own needs. That's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, it looks good. I'm sorry. I was just thinking of, I was looking at our dark mode toggler. I was like, does that still work?
Of course it does. There you go.
Yes, baby. There it is.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, we can do it even better. I mean, I can, oh, this is something that we'll explain a bit later. Let me get it out of the way. I can even do it here. Remember?
Mm-hmm. In
So I
the
will go to
operating system,
Docs,
that
and I'll
whole.
go to, oh, it is already on dark, so that doesn't work. But if I would go to light again, you'll see that the page will do it as well.
Nice.
Cool.
I'm just checking to see that the stuff we did last week is still working, essentially.
It's still in there. Yeah, it's absolutely still in there. Nothing to worry about. Anyway, yeah, this is in a nutshell how quickly you can get data out of a database. And we can go in the same approach. Let's do that as well, because obviously our data grid supports editing and creating and deleting records and stuff.
Right.
Let's check how that works. Well, for that, we'll go back to the demo site. And if we are checking out editing data, here is an example. I want to have this, but better, I want to use that pop-up edit form. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just have this edit form. So that's there is some nice useful information here for if this is all new for you. You can read it, you can click on the links and find more information. But for me, I'll deal with the code. So again, we have this demo coded out, and there is a couple of things which are interesting. One
So
of them is
Don, sorry, who has access to our demo center? Customers only, or is this
no,
something
anybody has
anybody
access
can
to our
access?
demos. Yeah, you can just go to demos.devexpress.com/Blazor in this case, and you'll get on this particular site. And you can check out all the controls that we have and all functionality that come with the controls, and you can just see how we did that demo, and then you can pick and choose pieces of code like I do now, and put that in your own application.
Cool.
So what we see is there is an edit form template which is new, or at least we see it in this demo. It wasn't in the previous one. But there is this edit form template that allows us to lay out all the elements that we want to edit. And there is some more code involved. There is this edit model saving, and there is this data item deleting. Update is probably something it's nothing that we need as far as I can see. And yeah, so what we can do is let's copy over this code again and adjust it to our own needs. So let's move that over. I'm going to put it in here. It will probably give some errors right now because we need to change some things. The grid customize edit model. So what we'll see is it will have an editable employee. In our case, we're still dealing with direct editing and browsing on the entity framework models, but this is something that I'd like to change during this broadcast. But for now, let's make this work. So I'm going to change this to customer. And this is executed when there is a new record being added. So you can preset some data. And for this is luck because the customer in our scenario has a first name and a last name as well. Let's check this all, change it all over to customer because that's what we're dealing with. If this is a new, so this is when you hit the save button, this code is being executed. So let's change this because we don't have the Nordwind data service. So in this case, we can say DB context customer add the editable employee. But if you want to make it a bit better, it's going to be, makes more sense. All right, so with this, we will, oh no, this is not.
Does it matter that that thing is still running at the top that you used earlier, or no?
No, not really, but it's, you are right, it's slightly annoying. So
I mean, I didn't say that.
you know, well, I was looking down and you were probably
Distracting.
looking up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's distracting, exactly. All right, so that's out of the way. This needs to be changed as well. And what we need to do here, if we want to do it properly, we need to first look up that customer in the database. This is an update. So we need to locate that the DB item, DB context dot customers find async, and the key value is going to be item dot customer ID. So we'll look that thing up. We can await this because we were doing the async version of it. If this is found, we'll need to copy the values from that item into the DB item. We can't just replace it because maybe there is more relationships or whatsoever involved on the background, and that would otherwise be killed off.
Hmm.
So better to copy over those properties. Well, for that, I'm going to use the same approach as I used before. So I will copy over these. We're just dealing with these ones. And in this case, I will do another. Let me remove this. Like this. And now we can use the same find pattern here, but now we can change this one to db item dot to equals item dot. So yeah, with the same, yeah, let's get it out. So with the regular expression search and replace, you can do some quick code modifications here.
Mhm.
And this allows us to copy over all the information from the item being edited in the grid into the real database item. And then in the end, we need to apply those changes. And we can do that by doing an await db context dot save changes async. So this will actually commit the changes, whether it was adding a new one here or modifying an existing one.
Mhm.
And then obviously things might go wrong at runtime. So maybe that item is violating with some rules in the database or whatsoever. So it is best to do this with a try.
What do you mean things might go wrong at runtime?
Well, for instance, maybe you have maybe some rule in the database requires you to fill in an email address, and we haven't done anything particular on the UI with that. So at the moment that we are trying to post that item into the database, and the database will notice that there is no email address, it will raise an exception. Like, hey, listen, man, you have to fill in this email address.
Oh.
Maybe you have to select a country from a list with countries and you didn't do it. Or maybe it's an invalid country. You know, there are all kinds
Mhm.
of rules and regulations in the database to make sure that the data which is stored in the database is persistent and it is all concurrent, it matches all up. So that's why
Got
we
it.
always need to check. Or maybe the disk is full of the database server and you'll get an error like, sorry, disk full. I mean, things can
Dick
happen.
full.
Yeah, it is still possible. Anyway, we should check and handle and handle that.
Okay.
So in this case, I will just catch it, and one of the things that come in the event arguments of this grid edit model saving is a cancel. So what that means is that the grid will cancel the current editing or whatsoever. So I'm going to put that to true, or it will not continue changing state of the grid. That's actually what it does. And another thing that I will do is I will add a property in this control where I will check whether the error has an inner exception. If that is not available, I will return the message. But if that is available, it normally has some more detailed information, which is more, yeah, better to display.
Okay.
And I will store that in that server error. For that, I will also put that server error here. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. Okay. Okay, make sure it's initialized so that that little green thing will go away. So in this case, we have also caught errors that might occur when saving this item. Um, if we go to the deleting, that's slightly different. Well, it looks quite a bit in this case on the previous one. So let's copy over a bunch of things. Before I do that, I need to make sure that the server error is empty. And now I can take over this code, put it in here, and remove a couple of things. So here we don't have to deal with this. We don't need to deal with that. We need to deal with this. I will now say db context dot customers. Oh, remove. And this was data model. I just removed that, or data item. Okay, so now we have changed that code. And yeah, this is something that doesn't really make me happy because there is a lot of things. And if I think forward during the project and we need to create other views
Mm-hmm.
for invoices, products, and I don't know, whatever, we have to do all this. But then for those entities. So we're going to work on a more clever way of doing so. But let's first see if this works before we can start with new plans. There's one thing that we need to copy over from the example as well, and that is in the edit forms demo, there is a grid command column. That grid command column is very important because that allows us to change the state from the grid into editing or inserting or browsing.
Mm.
If we wouldn't put this in, we would still be unable to edit because the grid will not switch over to edit mode. I'm going
Oh.
to put that in. Another thing that I wanted to do was the edit mode. I wanted to use the pop-up, and this is so simple. You just specify the edit mode, and it's going to be grid pop-up form. There we go. And the last thing that we need to take over were those events that I just changed. They need to be bound to the grid as well, obviously. With this in place, I guess, let me see if there's others of the key field name. That might be something as well. Put that in here, and that's going to be name of customer. ID. All right, well, let's see how this looks.
Okay.
Yeah, not this one. We want to have this one. Oh, you saw that the command column is the first column you see.
Yes. Okay.
And here we have a name which has been slightly modified. So let's click edit. Oh, here's the edit
Nice.
form, but you might have
There's
guessed.
no
Yeah.
way to
Well,
edit.
I mentioned that something new.
Don, what happened?
Well, we, well, at least I forgot to add something in this grid
I
declaration.
guess so.
Yeah, because that was the first thing that I saw as being different. So let's head back to this demo. I was talking about that edit form template, but I didn't copy it in.
Oh, you talked about it, but you never grabbed it?
No, yeah, exactly. Because I first had to create that new page, and then I got carried away with other stuff. So let's put it in, and I'm gonna do a search replace with regular expressions again because it's just
Way easier.
it's so fast. I'm gonna get this one out. I could actually leave the first and the last name in, but you know what? I'm just gonna get everything out. I'm gonna put this on one line so I can do the search and replace. So I'm gonna take that model. I'm gonna take the same stuff. So I'm gonna do this. And I will put this in here. Remove those null things. And here we go again. Well, that thing is still okay. That's why I took it. And now we need to grab this. Oh, you know what? I'm going to copy the whole line. I'm going to paste this in. And in this case, the caption is going to be number 2 again. This is all very nice. And here I will use the name of, and this can go customer 2. Then selection. Oh, wow. Let's see if we can now edit something. So here was one which I probably modified in the past. And here we have the form.
A lot of K's in that name. It can't be right.
Yeah, I guess my keyboard got stuck somewhere somehow. So let's remove the case.
Oh, and all of our, there they are.
Yeah, they're here. And if I hit save, you see that it's already been changed. You see that?
Yes.
And now let's do a new one. And remember those fields, they were being initialized as being new. So that was one of the things in code that was already there. But if I now hit save, it will not work. You see, it doesn't go. If I click, it doesn't continue.
Because it
So
wants all that information. Is that
now,
what you're
well,
saying?
the problem is that this has, I know that this has created an error, but we don't see the error.
Hmm.
So typically what happens is if I hit save, something is not okay. And what that means is typically that we are here and an exception has been raised, or actually we are here and something goes on on the server where we talked about disk full or I don't know, whatever, and we are trapped here. So we need to display that information somehow. Well, that's also quite easy to do. We can do that in the pop-up or at least in the edit portion, because if I would add another DX form layout item, which doesn't have a caption, it will has a new row. What was it? Row? Yeah. It will have a call span of a full width, 12. And I'll put in a CSS class also, which is going to be a form layout validation. We can deal with the styling of this a bit later if we want to, but I can now put in a template, and now I can check if server error n equals string.empty. I can display some logic here, and for this I will put in a small little div which will have a class validation errors as well as a red color. So if the server error has a value, it will be displayed. So if we now run the application again, we'll see what the problem is when we add a new item without filling in anything.
Okay.
And this is what I was talking about. Things can go wrong at the database, and this is typically a message which comes back from the SQL Server database like, hey man,
Cannot insert the
there has
value
to be an error.
null.
It's not the nicest error message, but at
No.
least that's something.
If I got that error message, I'd be like, what?
Yeah, well, typically,
Basically, what is it saying? It's saying you have to enter, you can't not enter something into the email. You have to enter an email.
yeah, you cannot insert nothing into the column email in the data in the table customer. But I mean, typically, this is a very risky message that you don't want to be throwing. You want to handle this in a different way because there is a security related aspect here. You have direct information on your database
Yeah.
and your table. And this is for a hacker or somebody that wants to hurt your application or business. This is obviously information that they would really like to have. So this is not the best way, but at least something will be projected back to us now, but we have to change that. This is a security thing.
You just wanted to say, please enter an email.
Exactly. Exactly. And you don't want to promote anything back that comes from the SQL server.
Right. Or gives any line of code.
So this is how we can create an application that allows us to create, insert, edit, update records. But yeah, as I mentioned, I mean the code is, I mean it's doable, but I mean you can imagine that if we need to do this for like 50 entities,
Right.
I mean maybe even more in a bigger application, this is a bit of work. And I mean, it's pretty much the same, except this is different for every entity because they've got different fields,
Hmm.
and but the structure is still the same. So this is something that I would like to change over, and yeah, also that whole validation process needs to be done better. I mean, this is very prime validation. So for that, you already saw me click away a little slide because I want to set up an architecture that allows us to do this way quicker. And for that, let me open it again. What we currently have is we have the database on one side with the Blazor application on the other side. And we have this as well. So we have EF classes, but the Blazor application communicates directly with the entity framework classes, and it will modify, it will use it to modify information as well, which is typically something that you want to abstract away.
You don't want the Blazor app directly communicating with.
Exactly,
Got it.
exactly. And also, suppose you want to migrate at a certain stage this Blazor application into a Blazor WebAssembly application, then you will need a web API backend that will deal with the database, and that would typically deal with the EF classes. Yeah, but then the Blazor app can no longer work with the entity framework classes anymore because they are running on the server while the Blazor application is running on the client. Yeah, so for this scenario with the Blazor server application, it's not a big deal. But if you want to migrate to Blazor WebAssembly, for instance,
Hmm.
yeah, you'll be running into some issues. So
Okay, so what goes in the middle there, Don?
yeah, there is a couple of things that we will put in the middle, and one of them is something that I use myself quite a bit. This approach, and not only for Blazor but for other kinds of projects as well. So we have a store, and a store typically works on the backside. It will work with those EF classes,
Hmm.
as you can see, but at the other side, so on the right side, it will use data transformation objects. So it will use DTO, design pattern, to transform these entity framework classes into other classes which are more appropriate for the front end. So in the entity framework classes, there are relational fields like a foreign key or that kind of stuff, and you probably won't be needing those on the front end, so you can leave those out, those data transformation classes. But this thing is able to perform all those CRUD operations. So the code that I have been modifying in the application, that can be put in a generic class, and I have that class. I will put that in, and I will tell you what it does. But important in this aspect is that this is entity related. So there is like an invoice store that will only deal with invoices. There's an invoice item store that will only deal with invoice items. There's not like a mix, because for that, so it deals with DTO, and it also deals with validation. And then we have a service, and those services, they are like maybe using two stores. For instance, the invoice service will have something with an invoice store, but also with an invoice item store, and it can do certain functionality.
Okay.
And those services will be injected into our Blazor application, or at least in the UI. Yeah, so it deals with the DTO models, not with entity framework anymore. It also doesn't know whether we are using entity framework or maybe we are using a web API. For the service, it doesn't matter. If we would use a web API over HTTP, we have to define different kind of stores which are running over HTTP. But the principle for the services remain the same. And this is more functionality oriented. So we have a customer service, and that allows us to search for customers, update customers, and do all that stuff. And but it's very customers oriented in this case.
Okay.
And yeah, it can use one or more of those stores. So this is a bit an architecture which works for a lot of scenarios. And yeah, how can we do that? Well, let's. How long are we running already? Yeah, we can.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we should do it just slightly a bit more. All right, so let's quickly do one of those things. Yeah, one of the other things, which is obviously something that I want to use, is for that mapping. So we need to copy fields from one object to another one. I did it by code in the example. So if you would go back here, this kind of stuff. This this is quite a bit of work maintaining all of this
Right.
through the entire application. So fortunately for that, we have various tools, and one of the most famous ones that I want to use in this example as well is the, oh, I had a couple of notes here. Yeah, okay. So this is for the DTO work. So I'm going to use a library which is the AutoMap. It's the most used one for this kind of stuff. And is typically what it does, it copies properties from one kind of object to another one based on names or rules or whatever. So you can just do one call and it will copy that whole bunch of code.
Mm.
Um, and another one which is also looking interesting, but I didn't really check it out in a real project. This Mapster seems to be quite efficient as well, but still, I guess most people are using Automapper, so let's stick to that one for now.
Okay.
And then for the validation, there is something else. You can go for the attribute-based validation that comes with .NET, but I would like to use the Fluent validation because that gives you a bit more power and yeah, it organizes things a bit nicer. And specifically for complex validation patterns, the Fluent validation gives you quite some benefits. You can also find the information on the links here, and we will be needing some packages in the project. All right, so that thing is still
It's still working up there.
Okay, so the first thing that I was gonna do is I will need a number of packages in the project. Again, I was talking about and since we are already online for quite some time, I will copy that quickly in. I'm going to use two packages here, which is the Automapper with the dependency injection package that will take Automapper with us as well. And I'm going to add the Fluent validation. We'll go over these things in a minute.
Okay.
So these are in. And then I'm going to add another project to this solution because I want those DTO models to not be in the same package as Entity Framework, because I want to have that separated. If you want to migrate the project, maybe we can do that at a later episode, transforming this into a WebAssembly version, for instance.
Yeah.
So for that, I will add another project, and that is again a class library, and this I will call DevExtreme.data. Same stuff. In this case, this one will reference that. And this one will do it as well. Okay. And yeah, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an EF store. And that was the second thing that popped up in the middle of that little diagram that I did.
The architecture.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to create a class EF store. That's going to implement some interfaces as well. So for that, and those interfaces, I'm going to put them in that new project. So we don't have any dependencies on that area if we want to do some other stuff. I'm going to call this interfaces. Yes. All right. So now I will copy some stuff in that interfaces section. The first one is an enum that, so we can specify whether we are creating, updating, or deleting something. You'll see a bit later where I use this for. I have also created an interface that will give us a result, whether the update or the creation or the delete has failed or succeeded. And if it failed, it's got the exception, so we can actually do something with the error.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is our data store. And in this case, It is a generic interface that specifies the type of the key. In our case, those are integers, but they could be strings or GUIDs as well. And the DTO model. And what you see is that such a store has a property key fields. It's got a method get by key. It's got a query. So it's got all the basic stuff that you can do to get data and to do CRUD operations. That EF store, I'm gonna put that in as well. Let me see where I have that. I have that result. Very important here. So this is implementing that data result that was why isn't it finding anything? This one. Let me quickly build this. And this one as well. All right. This is weird.
What's happening? It's not it's not finding it.
Finding the interface that I just put in. So let me see the data. It should be in here. Why didn't I reference that project? Yeah, I did do that. That's weird. Let's build it one more time. Oh, I see it. Now it's giving me another error. The EF result doesn't implement the iData results exception. And that is probably
Because
this needs to come from here. And this also needs to come not from here. It needs to come from the fluent validation instead of the standalone. And this obviously also needs the fluent validation. Reference, yeah, okay. I was a bit fast. I'm gonna put these ones again. All right, now it should work. Okay, yeah. So I've created this result class. So that is implementing the data result, and it does a couple of things here. The next piece of code is going to be slightly more, but I'll try to go over that quite quickly. And this is in fact some code that I produced on one of my conference sessions as well. Except I have modified this slightly to work with this. I just pasted in a whole bunch of code. So let me get the result out of the way. Let me get that whole thing out of the way. What I did, I have created an abstract EF data store class. And this will hold, if I switch back to our little diagram, that will be that generic base store with CRUD operations, etc. And that will be this. So what does this do? Because we want to reuse this, it is specifying the type of the EF context, it's specifying the key type of the entity that we're dealing with, the DTO model, and it will do the DB model. It is furthermore implementing this interface, and the interface that I put in as well. So it uses constructor injection because we're going to register this as well in the register services class. And it will use constructor injection to get a DB context, to get an auto mapper. And that was the one I was going to use to copy over those properties.
Okay.
And it is going to be using a validator from Fluent Validator of this particular model, so we can do validation. Well, once we request one of those stores, it will set all these properties, so we'll have access to it. There are a couple of helper methods like creating a new model, querying something from entity framework by key. Pretty much all very basic methods. And more important, there is an iQueryable based on TB model. But the cool thing with AutoMapper is that I can also have an iQueryable based on my DTO model. And that will be transformed by AutoMapper into one of those. And that is quite clever.
Mm.
And this, furthermore, I have a method that I can call to get a model based on key. So if I want to have that customer, remember, if I go back to this particular Razor thing, I need to find an item based on customer ID. Well, that deals exactly, this method deals with that. Then I have some helper methods. I'll skip over this quite quickly because you'll have a better way a bit down the road. Then there are a couple of abstract methods. They need to be implemented for every store, but these are only 3 things. One of them is these key fields. And you might have seen that here as well. Let me switch over here. That has to do with this.
Primary key.
Yeah. This is exactly, so we can use the store primary keys if we want to use this functionality. We need to have a method that allows us to set the key of a model. And it could be like in some scenarios it's customer ID, but in another scenario it's ID or whatever, depending on your data model. So that's why you need to implement this. We also have a method that will return the key of a specified model. And then last, we need to get the key of an entity framework model as well. So we need to do a bit of code with that. Then we have some validation logic that uses the Fluent validation. I'll talk about this probably the next episode or something, because this requires you to have a bit of knowledge of Fluent Validator. More important, we have a create method that allows us to pass in an array of items, and they will be stored into the database. So typically, the create will perform a validation here, and it will use AutoMapper to map those properties into the database item. So typically, this line of code replaces this lines of code.
All of that.
All of that, yeah.
Nice.
And this is for creating. We do a bit of extra work on creating items instead of the code that we did on the demo page here. This is just a one-liner, but we obviously do a bit of more work like validating, seeing if everything is filled in whatsoever. And in the end, we will do the commit. So these items, a bunch of items actually, could be inserted in one go. I do the same for the update. It looks like a lot of code, but it is actually not too much. Here we look up this particular item. So again, if I would switch over to this example here, this line of code has been replaced by this And if it's not found, we'll throw an error. And here we do the same approach like this code. You see, so it has a lot in common, but on a more generic way. So and the same goes for the delete.
Okay.
So this will be available after the broadcast, so you can check it out, and you will probably see that it's not too difficult. But more important, how can we now save lines of code on the front end? Well, that's gonna be as follows. I can create a new class. Let's quickly do that, and that class is gonna be my customer store. Just like this. It's gonna be a public class. And what I'll do now is this customer store is gonna be derived from that data store that I just showed you. And in this case, the EF data store, I'm passing in the Chinook context. The key type is an integer. The customer model doesn't exist yet. We need to fix that. And this is the EF model. So let me quickly in the data section create a folder with models. I will put in a new customer model. Why is this always on private? I don't know. And I will, for starters, and to not make the broadcast too long, I will just copy over the properties here. So I will take these ones, I'll leave the other ones out, and I will put that right here. So in our scenario, this DTO model is quite similar to the actual EF one, but you will see that during the development of the application that things might be added here or changed or whatever. So here's the customer model. And now we need to resolve that thing here. So here we have this store. The only thing we need to do for this store is we need to add a missing constructor. And we need to implement the abstract class. So in this case, the key fields is going to be new customer ID. This one is going to be a return model.customer ID. This one as well. Oh no, we need to set it. Model.customer ID. And because this is based on a generic class, you can see that everything is strongly typed. So this key, because I specified that as being int here, it's implementing this method as being an integer as well. And this is an integer as well. So it is all very type safe. And it is quite unlikely that you will create errors during the implementation of this class, which is what we want.
Right.
Model
No errors.
That's what we do it for. So in this case, and here we can actually make the class a bit more compact. I can use an expression body here, which is a very cool feature from CodeRush.
Oh.
Yeah. It will just make this like a one-line thing. So now we have created a store for customers. And what we also need to do, we need to create that validator. And that comes with Fluent Validator. How does Fluent Validator work in a nutshell? Public class customer validator. And that is abstract validator of type customer. And what we now can do is we can create a constructor, customer validator. And this is perfectly described in the documentation of Fluent Validator as well. So now you can set up rules to perform validation. So in this case, I can say x.lastName, not empty. So in this case, I'm now putting up some validation like, okay, the last name should be filled in. And I could also do rule for an email, for instance. I could say the email address should not be empty, and it should be of a type email address. So it will do 2 validation rules. And you can put up a whole bunch of stuff here. But this, now I have defined a validator for customers. If we want to use this store, I can do something else. I need to register this actually. There's 2 things, and this is exactly why I set up this method in the first place. There's a couple of things I need to add, and one of them is I need to register that validator. And that validator can be registered by saying services at scoped and then of type customer, and it's doing the customer validator. And the store needs to be done as well. And so notice that I am using the interface based on an integer and a customer model, which is a DTO, but the implementation will be that customer store that I just created, that small piece of code.
Okay.
And now I can change a couple of things in code. If I go back to that razor thing, where was it? Here. So instead of using that DB context, I can now change this over to, in this case, let me have a quick check. How did I do that? I now have that store injected here. I put it in the register. And this can go. So with this in place, I can now change a couple of things here. So this is going to be the model. Customer dot. This is going to be replaced with customer model. Oh, I didn't find any. I also, what I'm doing right now is I'm going to get rid of the entity framework stuff in the application. So there is no knowledge about it anymore. So this is why I'm now replacing quickly. Not sure why the search and replace didn't work. Customer model. And in the, yeah, I think that we, in the next stream, we're going to optimize this a bit more, because what we didn't do now is set up a service But you
Okay.
will see that this will already reduce code a bit. So in this case, we will need to still have this customer model. And in this case, we will use the customer store. But query. I will now leave this load options. We can use that slightly later. This needs to be changed as well.
So Don, this
Yeah.
is this is a different way of doing that pop-up edit or the entire.
Well, this is the reason for this is that we want to get away from the UI. Yeah, if I go back to this little thing here, we want the UI not to directly interfere with these EF classes anymore. We want to hide that away from the UI. And we will do that through those stores. Yeah, so the Blazor UI will, in this case, because we don't have the service not set up yet, but we will now use the store to use certain functionality, and we can reduce code from the front end, and that's exactly what we want, and also to hide away that the entity framework models.
Okay.
So I'm quickly, so in this case, for instance, I can now say, I can leave this for what it is. I can now here say, if it is new, I can say customer store, create item. But in this case, this item is not that entity framework item anymore. So this DB context is all going away from the UI. I am passing in this customer model. So that's that newly created model here. And that will be transformed by using this store, and that's using AutoMapper into an entity framework model. So that will still end up in the database, but the whole entity framework is abstracted away from the UI. And specifically this piece of code that was bugging me from the very first time.
Mm-hmm.
So this can be replaced with await customer store. And again, update async item. I don't need to do this anymore. This can all go.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, and this can go as well. And so typically we are removing quite a bunch of code now from the UI, and we are using that customer store to do so. The delete item is obviously the same. I mean, here we can just get that item. In fact, it is now a customer model item. And we can use the customer store to delete it. This is by key, I think, yeah. Again, we don't need to do that lookup of that item. That's all being taken care of in that base class. And so you already see that a bunch of code has been disappeared. And there is one last thing that we need to configure, and that has to do with the AutoMapper. The AutoMapper needs a mapping table, basically, on how to perform certain mappings from one object to another one. And
Okay.
the way that we can do that is by implementing a mapper profile. I will put that right in here in the register services page or file. Here we have a mapper profile, and the mapper profile is derived from a base class from AutoMapper, which is very well documented. And in this case, we didn't do the employee model, but we can do that quickly as well if we would like to. I am creating a map to exchange data from customer and the EF entity into that other object by using default rules. And you can customize those rules for certain elements and so ever. And that's all very well documented. But for us, it's not really an issue right now. But also, I'm putting in a reverse map so we can also, Automapper can also transform customer models into customer objects.
Okay.
And this map needs to be set up, and we can do that just in the registered data services. Also, this is a plain documentation here on how to register this mapper profile to Automapper. And with this in place, the whole mapping process goes automatically, and we don't need to have that bunch of code that was bothering me from the first moment I put it in. So if we haven't forgotten anything, we should have the same effect, but we have changed the architecture in a bit more. Oh, what's happening here? The customer does not exist. Oh yeah, that was a copy and paste here. Customer model. What else? Yeah, this is going to be the customer model as well. I could actually use that key. I could use the customer store. Oh no, it doesn't. And here, the query should probably something be like this. All right.
All right. Let's see.
Yeah, let's do a quick reload to make sure that it is working. So now we are having a part of the architecture implemented. So typically this is not the customer, the entity framework objects anymore.
Right.
These are the customer models. And now what we could do, for instance, is if I would go to this back here, I could, for instance, do something like this on the model. Full name. And that is going to be, oh, wait a sec. This is first name or last name.
So what is this adding or doing?
I'm now adding a property with which displays the full name. So it's concatenating the last name with a colon and first name. But this is just in the model. So this is not being stored from in the database, but this is the model. And because I have done this in the model, I can now go to the grid. And I could say I want to have this. And then I can remove this one. So now the title is not right, but now you see that the last name and the first name are in one column. You see?
Or in the same column. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can do a whole bunch of more things with those DTO models, and leave certain information out, or do stuff like this. And so that is one of the advantages of using the DTO design pattern. And I guess that it would be good to not continue with that services thing, but to talk about that in the next episode.
Yeah, let's do it next time.
So we still have the same approach here, but now we are actually on the front end dealing as I wanted with these
Right.
DTO models. Yeah, so the Blazor application doesn't have any knowledge of entity framework anymore because that's abstracted away by this layer. And then in the next episode, we'll reduce more code, putting in those services.
Okay.
So I guess the last thing that we didn't put that in the validation. We can't show the validation, which is a bit of a bummer. If I would add a new one, let me see. Yeah, no, that doesn't work right now.
Next time, Don, we're gonna
Yeah.
be here. We
So,
got we got scheduled. Well, actually, so next week I'll adjust the schedule, but it's we'll be live on Wednesday
yes,
because you will be
I
with
will
us
be
in
traveling.
California.
Yeah, I will be coming into the office on Wednesday, on Tuesday. So we will do a broadcast on Wednesday from the studio, from the office.
From the studio.
Yeah, well, I guess it's
Yes,
Jeff's
we are
studio.
professionals from the studio.
Yeah. Well, Jeff,
But
in
I'll
case you
adjust that
heard it,
on our
Jeff,
channels.
in case you heard it, you've got 1 week to set up the studio. Cool.
Emergency. All
Oh,
right.
yeah.
So I'll adjust the schedule on our Twitch page, but yeah, next Wednesday we'll keep we'll keep going on this.
Yes, and then we'll continue with this exact application. I will update the Git repository already with it, and I'll write a blog post what we discussed here. Next time we'll deal with the validation, at least the UI for the validation, but that's going to be changed a bit. And we already implemented some proper validation logic, so we can have a look at that. And we can probably do another episode next week. What do you think?
A twofer? Yeah, I mean, it's yeah.
Yeah,
The more the merrier.
of course. Yeah, we want to have this to work, and then we can. Once we have this, we can do some stuff with the rich editor. We can do some reporting. We can do some other cool stuff.
Okay. All right, Don. Thank you so much, and we'll chat next week
I see you next week.
and see you next week in person.
Exactly.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.